psychology students. So today I'm going to be focusing on one of the hardest questions actually on a social influence topic, and it's looking at how social change happens basically and how you apply your knowledge and the things that you've learned from social influence to these examination questions. So I'm going to talk you through this and I'm going to talk you through exactly example answers of how to go about answering these questions that you get from the examining board. And again, if you was to follow my directions, it could be much easier to get that A star in A-level psychology that I know many of you are actually looking for. So let's get started. Okay, just to clarify situations actually, I have looked through all the past examination questions since around 2016, from when there was a spec change, and there actually has never been a 16 marker on the social change question or the social processes. So I'm not saying there won't be one. All I'm saying is there've never been one. So just keep that in mind. Right, before we start, the key thing is knowing what your definitions are. And before we start, it's very, very useful to know the key things in terms of what is social change. Okay, so obviously, social change refers to the ways in which a society develops over time. So replacing things like their beliefs, attitudes and behaviour with new norms and expectations. So in a nutshell, it's basically society used to do that and it's no longer doing that. And there's a lot of examples that you can pull up that how society has changed through things like gay marriage, things like Greenpeace and so forth, etc. Even the civil rights movement and so forth in terms of slavery, suffragettes. Loads of examples that you can draw on. Another definition that you do need to 100% know is a lot of people get pulled up by what you mean by processes. Okay, so very straightforward. A process is just a procedure of how something happens. So if I was going to say to you, how do you make a cake? What's the process? What's the procedure? You'll tell me, for example, you need your eggs, flours, sugar and so forth. Then you mix it all together and so forth. Okay, so a process is how something happens. And usually with these questions, they seem to ask a lot about processes or what is the process of social change. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to break it down for you nice and easily. Hopefully your psychology teacher would have already gone through the key AO1, that is knowledge and understanding, with you, but I'm going to go through them very briefly with you, okay? And we'll see, and what's it called, and if you have any questions, you can just contact me and we can go from there. Okay, so I'm going to start off by looking at one of our key examination questions, and these questions are usually AO2. If you're unsure what AO2 means, so AO2 means application. You need to apply it to a scenario, a STEM. Usually I tell my students, for example, when you see a name like Peter, John, Matthew, Mark, etc., that's when you have to apply it to their situation. In these cases, they're going to give you like a scenario, and in this scenario they give you something to do, some type of social change. So I'm going to break this kind of question down for you step by step. Okay. So as you can see, I've got fewer and fewer people use. I've got that highlighted. So what does that mean? Okay, already I know that's a social change question, because the whole fact of fewer and fewer people use, it means that they used to use, they no longer use. Again, I straight away know it's a social change question. Now, a lot of psychology questions ask you about knowledge, okay? They're not interested in your knowledge and what you know. They're interested in what psychology has said. So things like theories, things like research, what have they told us? And that's what they mean by knowledge. Okay, so this means what you've learned in social influence or any area of psychology of that matter, but usually because we're doing social influence, it makes sense that we're going to focus on social influence. Okay, and then we have processes. Okay, so what does processes means? What specific things need to be done based on what we have learned in social influence, or what specific things have happened. Remember, processes means about how something has happened or how something should happen. Okay, so usually in these questions, knowledge and processes goes hand in hand together. So if you have knowledge of knowing how to bake a cake, yeah, you've got that knowledge there. Okay, the processes is now going to be you actually doing it. So I'm actually going to put the egg and the flour together and so forth, etc. And finally, 6 marks. Very, very importantly, when you see the marks in any question, you need to break it down. You need to look at the question and say, what do they want me to do? Okay, how do they want me to break it down? So already I know it's an AO2 application question. Okay, so how I'm breaking it down is I'm going to get 2 marks for the knowledge bit, as you can see. Okay, 2 marks for talking about the processes and 2 marks for applying it to the STEM or scenario. In this case, it's going to be about single-use plastic items. Okay, so that's how I'm going to break it down to make sure I get my full 6 marks. Okay, so before we start, let's look at what you should know already. So your knowledge from social influence. So you've studied the whole of social influence. I hope it was really enjoyable to you. What knowledge should you now know? Okay, so you should know that minorities can influence the majority too. Okay, that should be something that should have come from your studies. Okay, and how can the minorities influence majority? They have to be consistent. They have to be committed. That's what we call the augmentation principle. That is, they have to be willing to sacrifice something or be uncomfortable in some way. Okay, and the minority has to be flexible, so they can't be too dogmatic in their viewpoints. Okay, and that obviously, once they display all these behaviors, the snowball effect is going to happen. Okay, and eventually there's going to be a change because people are now going to be doing a new behavior, but they're going to forget actually where the message came from in the first place, which we call social crypto amnesia. Okay, so that is how the minority, that's what we know so far. And obviously we have majorities also have a big influence on people too. We've learned that during our studies in social influence. So we learned in this specific area why people conform, for example, such as normative social influence, to be liked and to be accepted. And that leads to compliance, which is changing your behaviour in public, but not in private. And then we have another explanation, which is people change their behaviour to the majority because of informational social influence. Okay, and that often leads to internalization, where it's basically people change their behaviour in public and in private. Okay, so that is what we've learned so far. And the final thing we've learned in social influence is that people are pressured to obey. When you're pressured to obey from, for example, authority figures, people are most likely to do that. Okay, so we've learned mainly legitimate authority. Okay, so when we perceive people as being legitimate, or we perceive an organisation as having some kind of legitimacy over us, we're more likely to obey. Okay, and we also learned something else called gradual commitment. So this is the fact of the matter is we don't tend to obey really big requests. We obey very small increments of requests. So small things which will be like, oh, it's not really that big anyway. Oh, it's not really that big anyway. So we're gradually committing ourselves. And we got this from obviously Milgram's research, where the voltage, the volt machine went up in 15 volt increments instead of just saying wham, shock somebody up to 450. That would have been too big. So it went in gradual stages. Okay, so that is what we've learnt so far. Okay, so now we know this, we know what we've learnt in social influence. How do we now use this knowledge and answer an examination question? So let's go back to the examination question. So I'm going to break it down for you in stages. Fewer and fewer people use single-use plastic items such as water bottles and plastic straws. So I'm going to start off answering this question. I'm going to let the examiner know that I know what social change is and you know what social change is occurring. So in this case, I defined what is meant by social change, and in this case, the social change is replacing people's beliefs and attitudes about single-use plastic usage. Okay, so that's what I'll start off with. So this is how I'll start off this specific question with. Okay, then I decided I'm going to pick the knowledge I'm going to talk about. Again, remember, there are 3 areas we've learned in social influence. We've learned that the minorities can influence the majority. We've learned majorities can also influence society, and we learned that people obey authority figures. Okay, so I've decided to focus this example on, I'm going to focus on minorities can influence the majority too. So I'm going to focus on consistency, commitment, flexibility, snowball effect, and social crypto amnesia. Okay, so the next part of me answering this question will be focusing on my psychological knowledge. Again, I'm focusing just on minorities can influence the majority. Okay, so as you can see, I've highlighted all the key points which are my knowledge. Okay, so I've spoken about psychological knowledge demonstrates that minority groups can also have an influence on the majority as well. This first sentence alone is me drawing from my knowledge. Okay, so after I've displayed my knowledge, I can now talk about the processes. Okay, so in psychology, you have to be as explicit as possible. Okay, so the process the minority will need to go through to have an influence is to be consistent in their views and stick to the same beliefs and values constantly. The minority will also need to be committed to their cause and be willing to make some type of sacrifice to highlight their views. Again, this is known as the augmentation principle. Finally, the minority will need to be flexible in their views. This means they cannot be too dogmatic in their views and must be willing to willing to compromise on their attitudes and values. Now, if you've noticed here, I have not talked about the STEM at all, or the scenario about plastic waste usage, because you have to be systematic. That means you have to be structured in your answers in psychology. Okay, so I've just spoken about, here is all knowledge about what the minority needs to do. Very, very important. You have to break it up. Okay, and then looking at the next part. Okay, so as you can see, key terminology in bold. You start off with the knowledge, okay, and everything else is how this happens. So here I've combined knowledge and processes together, what the minority have to do, okay. And the next part, the final part of my answer, is explaining why fewer and fewer people are using single-use plastic items. So now I'm addressing the application bit, yeah, the scenario bit. So as you can see, very, very importantly, in terms of why fewer and fewer people are using single-use plastic items, we have seen environmental groups be consistent, there we go, getting in the keywords again, in their campaigning regarding what plastic is doing to the environment. Demonstrations were held as well as protests, and they stood firm in their beliefs. Okay, so here's me getting the keywords into explaining what has happened in society in terms of how we've changed from using single-use plastic items to be more to recycle things a lot more. Okay, these environmental groups also would have shown commitment, again, there's my knowledge again, by making personal sacrifices. Again, augmentation principle. So anywhere there's an opportunity for me to use key terminology, use it themselves, such as not using any plastic at all in their day-to-day lives, and even refusing to buy any products they need that are made out of plastic. So you need to be specific, use a specific example to meet your application side of the question. Okay. Finally, these groups would have had to be flexible in their stance by maybe saying that if people already had plastic items in their homes, they could keep them and make more conscious decisions when buying any more new products. This would have meant that the majority would not have felt too far out of their comfort zone and know that the change is within their reach. Again, I'm really talking about the scenario of single-use plastic, about the change that has happened. I'm using specific examples, okay? And then finally, this will mean that more and more people will start making conscious buying decisions in regards to their plastic usage, which ultimately will be the snowball effect leading to social crypto amnesia, where laws are now passed in regards to paying for plastic bags, for example, and people forgetting that the original message came from the environmental activist groups. Okay, that's why I've snuck in all the keywords and I've applied it to the scenario of single-use plastic items. Okay, so as you can see, any mark that's above 4 marks, or 4 marks and above, it gets marked based on levels. Okay, so I'm sure most of you are only interested in the top levels, because obviously the top levels is where you're going to get your highest marks from. Okay, so if you follow my structure, okay, if you follow this structure, so AO2, 6 marks, you will be able, okay, to show you've applied your knowledge of social influence processes. So you've applied what you know about social influence, that is how the minority can affect society, okay, and what they have to do will be clear, okay, and it will be well detailed, okay. Not generally, we only go for well detailed here, okay. The answer is coherent, that is, it makes sense, and you've used appropriate use of terminology. That means you have used terminology all throughout, as you can see in bold, for example. So each stage of the question, at each stage of the question, you've used the key terminologies when you need to. Okay, that's very, very important, and that is how you get a level 3. That is 5 to 6 marks in this specific question. Okay, so what I've done as well, as you know, I've broken down what we've learned from social influence. So I've just told you how the minorities have an influence on social change or influence people. So we've also learned majorities also have a big influence. So maybe you know a lot about normative social influence, compliance, informational social influence, and internalization. Maybe you want to see a question on that. Okay, how that could be written. Okay, so you say you don't want to focus on minority, you want to focus on majority influence, because this is really going to affect your revision on how you aim at your revision. Okay, or you want to focus on obedience, what you've learned from obedience, and how that can also affect social change. So what I've done for you, okay, I've created other examination answers, so just like the one I've shown you now, but I've written them up to look at how the majorities can have an effect on people, and also how pressures to obey can also influence people as well. Okay, so if you can see, let me come out of here. Okay, so if you can see here, I've got for you, so the link's in the description. I've got this example that I've given to you, so minority influence example. So I've written out the 6th marker here for you, and I've also got the majority influence example, which I've written out for you here as well, in case you want to use what you've learned from normative, informational, so forth. Okay, and I've also got obedience. Sorry, come out from there. I've also got obedience influence, example 1, using gradual commitment. And I've got obedience influence, for example 2, using legitimate authority. Okay, so I've got those examples there for you to take a look at, and for you to use it to support your own writing, or use it as revision as well in terms of what you need to know for this part of the examination. Okay, so so take a look at those examples. Again, a link is in the description box. And finally, I hope that has been really, really useful. Please do subscribe, because I'll be doing other key nuggets to help us get through, even if you're on your 12 or your year 13. So key nuggets in terms of what people may find difficult, try and break things down for you really, really easily to help you get an A-star in psychology. I used to help a lot of students over the years get to that top marks, for example, by doing really, really simple stuff. So yeah, over the week, so you get notified, for example, when I'm going to be releasing some more content for you. But again, let me know how you find it. Leave a comment on the end of your essays, the essays that I've written as well. And as well as this as well, if there are any questions or any examination questions that you're finding difficult, also leave a comment as well on the website with where I've written the examination questions. And again, maybe me and other psychology teachers can put together some key A-star answers as well to help you with that as well. All right, take care. Bye.